Well, hey there, everybody! It's your boy, Mr. Perry. We're back at it, Unit 4, Lesson 2. This time, we're gonna get into for loops. So let's get started. First off, we're just gonna do some quick review. Remember that there are in Java we have definite as well as indefinite loops. And in the previous lesson, we learned about indefinite loops, which are input-controlled loops, and it may repeat 0 times or it may repeat hundreds of times, right? So that was what we were looking at here. And you also have what are called definite loops with while loops, and one like this where you actually have a count variable, and it's the count variable that actually controls the while loop. And again, you're giving it your starting point, your end point, and you're giving it a way to move forward. This loop will iterate 5 times because it is counter controlled. It's a definite loop. Well, in this lesson, we're going to be learning about for loops, and for loops are an example of a definite loop. And so for loops look like this: for, and then in parentheses, int count equals 0, semicolon, count is less than 10, semicolon, count plus plus, close your parentheses, and then we've got our curly braces, and then we're doing something inside here. All right. This for loop will iterate 10 times because it is counter controlled. It's going to start with 0, it'll print 0, and then it will go up. It's going to print the numbers from 0 to 9 is what this particular loop is going to do. All right. And let's remember too that in Java, all loops need 3 things. You have to give them a starting point, you have to give them an ending point, and you have to give them a way to move forward. So we learned how to do this with while loops. Now we're going to look at how we do this with a for loop. So here are the steps to writing a for loop. Step 1. Write the word for, open your parentheses, then declare and initialize the loop control variable, followed by a semicolon. So you can do for, open your parentheses, int count equals 0, semicolon, and now count is your loop control variable. Now I could call this whatever I want to. I could call this x, I could call this num, I could call this I. There's a lot of different, you just have to have a name here. But count is a good intuitive one to use. All right, again, this is the loop control variable. Now, next thing you got to do is you need to add the Boolean condition that will determine when the loop will end, followed by another semicolon. So count is less than 10. That's my Boolean condition. I don't have to have parentheses around it this time. I just write it out like this, and again, have another semicolon. And then finally, you've got to change the loop control variable and then close the parentheses and then add your curly braces. So count plus plus means that my count variable is going to go up by 1 each time. And then I've got my opening and closing curly braces. So I am ready to rock and roll. All right. Now, the only other thing that you would want to do is anything you want to have happen repeatedly needs to go in between your curly braces. So you can have 1 line of code, you can have 100 lines of code. But whatever you need to have happen repeatedly needs to go in between your curly braces. And there you have it. So, and then anything you want to have happen after the loop goes outside of the curly braces. So again, if I want it to print those are the numbers 0 through 9, that would need to go outside of those curly braces. So this just prints the count variable 0 all the way up to 9. And then when it halts, those are the numbers 0 through 9. Now, there are different ways that you can manipulate a for loop. So for instance, let's say you wanted to count backwards. You would initialize and declare your loop control variable at the higher number. So rather than starting it at 0, let's say I wanted to start at 10. I could say for int I equals 10. And then I would say, as long as I is greater than 0, here is my Boolean condition. And again, depending on your desired outcome, I could say as long as I is greater than 0, or as long as I is greater than or equal to 0. And again, that just depends on your desired outcome. And now I need to change that loop control variable. So instead of doing I plus plus, I'm doing I minus minus. And again, you could change this however you want to. But if I'm just going to go backwards by 1, then I'll do I minus minus. And so then I could print I each time. And then what this is going to print is this is going to print 10 all the way down to 1. Because again, it'll print 10, and then it will go right down here. This says go down by 1, so it'll go down to 9, and then this is still true, so it'll print 9. That means go down to another one. That's going to take it down to 8, and so on and so forth. So you can, like I said, you can change a for loop. You can modify a for loop so that the control variable changes in different ways. So let's say I wanted to count the multiples of 10 from 0 all the way up to 100. I could say for int I equals 0, as long as I is less than 100, I plus equals 10. All right, now what this is going to do is this is going to print, well, this will print 0 the way this one is set up. It actually probably should start at 10 because, I mean, I guess 0 is a multiple of 10 if you multiply it by 0. Anyways, this will print 0, and then instead of going up by 1, it's going to go up by 10. So it'll add 10 to it, and then check the loop control variable. And so when obviously 10 is still less than 100, so it'll print 10. And then it'll go up to 20. And again, 20 is still less than 100, so it'll print 20. And this will go all the way up to 90, and it'll print 90. When it gets to 100, when it adds another 10, this is no longer going to be true, so it'll print 0 all the way up to 10, or 0 all the way up to 90. So again, we're starting at 0, and continue as long as I is less than 100, and then add 10 to I after each iteration. So we're going to start at 0, and we're going to count all the way up to 90 each time. So there you go. Again, 0 multiples of 10 equals 0, multiples of 10 equals 10, multiples of 10 equals 20. It does that all the way up to 90, and then that one would be done. All right, and then another thing that your exam is going to want you to do is it's going to want you to know how to convert a while loop into a for loop, and vice versa. You might have to even take a for loop and figure out what would be the equivalent while loop. So we'll go ahead and look at this one. So our loop control variable is num, and we're starting at 1. So the first thing I would do is say, okay, for int num equals 1. Now the Boolean condition that we're checking is right here, as long as num is less than or equal to 20. So that's our Boolean condition. So we would just write that next right here. And then num plus plus down here, this is where it's actually being incremented. So we would go ahead and copy that over to here. So again, this is our loop control variable being declared. So we would do that here. This is our Boolean condition. That would go in the middle. And then again, num plus plus, num plus plus. And then anything we would want to happen in between would just have to go in between our curly braces. And we don't have to have the num plus plus down here this time because it's in our for loop. Okay. So go ahead and try to figure out what the do what method will return. What happens when you do what with 5 or when you do what with 10? This is, again, another example of code tracing loops. And for this one here, we're going to be looking at, one from our AP exam. So this is a College Board question. Go ahead and pause the video here, see if you can figure out what will get returned when you call do what with 5 or when you do what with 10. I'm assuming that you've paused the video at this point. So we'll go ahead and trace through this thing and see what is going on. So again, figure out what the question's asking. That's always step 1. So which of the following best describes the value returned from a call to do what? And again, we're going to look at do what with 5 and then do what with 10. Now what's being returned is our variable VAR. So that's what we need to watch out for is when it says what value is returned, return VAR. That means this is what we've got to pay close attention to. All right, now let's count the number of variables and create our trace table. So we've got int num being passed in, so we would want to keep track of that. We have int var, and then we have int loops. So we've got 3 variables here that we need to keep track of. So I'm going to go ahead and create my trace table for all 3 of these. Now, if we go ahead and give it 5, we're going to test do what with 5. So our num is 5. Then next, our variable VAR is 0. Now we need to go into our loop. So we initialize our loop with loop equal to 1. And then we're going to go ahead and do this loop as long as loop is less than or equal to our num, which is 5. So 1 is less than or equal to 5. That is true. That means go ahead and do what's in our loop. It says VAR plus equals loop. So VAR originally was 0, but now we're adding 1 to it because loop is 1. So VAR is now going to be 1. And now we need to go back, or now we need to go ahead and add 2 to VAR. So VAR, I'm sorry, we need to add 2 to our loop. So loop goes up by 2, loop is now 3. All right, now we need to check our Boolean condition. 3 is less than or equal to 5. That is true. So now we need to add 5 to, I'm sorry, we need to add 3. Goodness gracious. Let me go back one. All right. So this is true. That means we need to take our variable, which currently is 1, and we need to add 3 to it because that's what our loop is. So 1 plus 3 gets us up to 4 for VAR. And now we need to add 2 to our loop, so that gets us up to 5. And now we check our Boolean condition. 5 is less than or equal to 5, so that's true. That means we need to do our loop one more time. So VAR plus equals loop. VAR currently is 4. We're going to add 5 to it. So that goes up to 9. And now we're going to add 2 more to our loop control variable. So this is now up to 7. And obviously 7 is not less than or equal to 5. That is false. So our VAR is going to be 9 when we return it. So that kind of gives you an idea of how to code trace a for loop. So this returns 1 plus 3 plus 5 when do what 5 is called. So what this method actually does is this method returns the sum of all odd integers between 1 and the num. So if we were trying to figure out what's it gonna do when we call do what with 10, well, that's going to be 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 7 plus 9. So whatever those all add up to, that's what's going to get returned in that case. So there you go. We'll go ahead and get to our lesson review here. Again, there are 3 parts to a for loop header. You've got the initialization, the test condition, which is a Boolean expression, and then an increment or a decrement of some kind. In a for loop, the initialization statement is only executed once before the evaluation of the test Boolean expression. The variable being initialized is referred to as the loop control variable. In each iteration of a for loop, the increment or decrement statement is also executed after the entire loop body is executed, but before the Boolean expression is evaluated again. So that, again, is how you go through and trace it. A for loop can be written or rewritten into an equivalent while loop and vice versa. So we need to know how to do that. All right, guys. Well, that's the end of our video today. As always, leave a question or a comment on today's video, and I will see you in class.